Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf. It's the beginning of May, the 3rd today, so time for my April tops and flops, the duds, the surprises, the best of everything. And as always, we start with the tops, and within the tops, we start with the book that I thought about the most. And that was Babsi Sidhwa's novel, Cracking India, first published in 1988. And I read this together with Najwa from Najwa Reads and Joe Smith, who doesn't have a channel, but we all know her because she comments on all of our videos. Thank you, Joe. Babsi Sidhwa is a Pakistani author born in the 1930s, but she has been living in the US for most of her life, so in the diaspora. And Cracking India is a historical novel set just before the partition in 1947 and then in the year of the partition, India, Pakistan. The main character is a young girl, Lenny. She is about 6 when the novel opens, and then, she's 10, 11 of course, because it's more than 1 year. And you know that I normally don't like child narrators, but it's made absolutely clear right from the start that Babsi Sidhwa has Lenny looking back as an adult woman on her childhood during those years. And I mean, the novel gives a really broad array of characters. We have Aya, Lenny's nanny, who is Hindu, and then you have Muslim neighbors, and it's made clear how the violence between the different ethnic and religious groups erupted. But also what made me think is the fact, how we look at history. Because I knew that Pakistan and India, they split, and then Pakistan was founded. But that gives the impression as if this is just something, drawn on paper. And the title, Cracking India, how can a country be cracked in two? How can another country just be born, so to speak? So those two things, eruption of violence between people who have been living next to each other for a long, long time, but also the outlook on history, and of course the fact that I don't know that much about how the partition worked. I mean, who were the main characters? And I was really, really lucky that Najwa read this book with us, because she lives in Islamabad. She is from Pakistan, so she could explain a lot and give a lot of background. But I really thought this was an excellent book. Historical fiction, giving a good story, good characters, but also really teaching me something. So it made the tops in the category book that I thought about the most. Next up in the top category is the book that surprised me the most, and that is a German book, and unfortunately it's not available in any translation. So you have to read it in German, and it's a tome, and that is Gabriele Tergit, Effinges. It was first published in parts in 1951, and now the German publisher, that was the word, the German publisher Schöffling decided to publish it in its entirety last year. So it's a 900-page book. Gabriele Tergit was a German journalist and author. She wrote reportages of court cases, and she also published 2 novels, this one and another one, Käsebier erobert den Kurfürstendamm. Käsebier conquers the Kurfürstendamm. And I read this together with Mel from Mel's Bookland Adventure, and I read it for our ongoing challenge, Read German Books 2020. Link to the Goodreads group is down below. As I said, it's a tome. And it covers the history of two Jewish families from the end of the 19th century until 1940. There are one family is a banker's family, and the other family is industrialist, so they have a factory. And we follow the main characters, two brothers, Paul and Karl, who found this factory and then marry into the banker's family. The book is giving an overview over these, let's say, 40 years of German history in a way that I've never read before. It touches upon the economic changes, the political changes, but without ever doing a Wikipedia info dump. So the author is doing her job intelligently, and it has its lengths. I mean, yes, some chapters I thought were more engaging than others. But as a whole, I thought it was a brilliant book, and it surprised me because, first of all, I'm not into family histories normally. And I thought, well, just another book about German history. I've read a lot of them, fictionalized books also. But this one is different than all of the books that I read before. And I mean, I don't know whether there will be an English or American publisher picking this up. 900 pages, I know, but it's definitely worth it. I'm still thinking of it. I could have put it in the category book I thought about the most, but the surprise of how fresh and new this was just made me put it in the category book that surprised me the most. And the last book in the tops category is the best nonfiction book I read in April. And again, this was a really tough call because I read quite some really, really good nonfiction. But in the end, I went for another buddy read with Heidi, and that is Andrea Wolf's book, The Invention of Nature, published a couple of years back, I think in 2015. I'll leave the correct date in the show notes. Andrea Wolf was born in India, then she lived in Germany. Her name is very German, Andrea Wolf. And then she now lives in Britain. She's a biographer. And this was the first book that I've read by her. It is about a German scientist and explorer, Alexander von Humboldt, in the late 18th century, early 19th century. Humboldt died in 1859. And he had this, he was a naturalist, and like I said, an explorer. So the book is a biography focusing on his work. So we have his famous travel through South America, long travel, not weeks or months, but years. And another one towards the end of his life through Russia. But what made this book so good, first of all, it's written really, really well. It's engaging, and for me, biographies can be sometimes really dry if the author doesn't tell a story, but give facts, summarizing facts. That's not what Andrea Wolf does. But it was also because Alexander von Humboldt was one of the most famous scientists in his time, and he was really a visionary. He had this idea of nature as a whole. He developed climate zones that we still use. He was interested in the connection between various living creatures, whether it's vegetation or whether it's animals and humans. He wrote about the impact of humans on nature. So that those were all things that were really new at the time. He was a big influence on Darwin, for instance. But unlike Darwin, Alexander von Humboldt now is almost forgotten. And that's a shame, because if you read this book, you realize how huge his impact was, not only on people like Darwin or nature writers, but also on our now current view on nature and things like climate zones and thermal zones and whatever. And the things he talked about, the impact of humans on nature, is a big issue now. So we should really look back on Alexander von Humboldt and learn from him, and start by reading this book, which was just really excellent. So these were my top reads of April. On to the flops. And the first one is a book that I was really looking forward to, Jenny Offill's Weather, published earlier this year. Jenny Offill is an American author, and her previous novels, Department of Speculation, about the failing of a marriage, I thought was really brilliant. But Weather just didn't do it for me at all. I mean, it's not a bad book, and Jenny Offill can write, but no. But let me tell you what the book is about. It's the main character is Lizzie Benson. She's a librarian living in the US, and she also works, in the course of the book, she starts working for an old friend, Lydia, who has a podcast, and there are mail coming in, you know, from right-wingers about climate change, and Lizzie is asked to answer this mail. This sounds like a straightforward story, but the book isn't. It's not linear. It's giving short sort of anecdotes or scenes from Lizzie's life. We have journal entries, and then, you know, so it's more, it's fragmented, and it's more like pieces of a puzzle. But for me, it just didn't go anywhere. It felt like a very abbreviated, because it's not a big book, it's under 200 or just about 200 pages, but it felt like an abbreviated version of Duck's Newburyport. You know, these sort of really navel-gazing woman, and the topics that Offill obviously wanted to address, like the time we live in and the worries people have, whether it's about climate change or about politics in the US. That's all, yeah, interesting, but the way the book was done, it was just, for me, completely forgettable. If I think about it now, I couldn't tell you really anything about the book other than these facts that I just presented. So a lot of people love this book, I know, but for me, it was just entirely forgettable and boring, unfortunately. And the second flop for April was actually a book that I read in March but couldn't talk about in March, so it wasn't included in my March tops and flops because I read it for the BookTube Prize. And I will leave links to all the BookTube Prize information, including my ranking video, down below. And that book was Kylie Reid, Such a Fun Age, published in 2019. It's a debut novel. Kylie Reid is a Black American author, and like with Offill's Weather, the topic of the book was really interesting because it's about race relations and the woke white savior. So you have two central characters, the white woman, successful 35-year-old Alex. She is a blogger, an influencer, and her 25-year-old Black babysitter, Amira. And the story opens when there is an incident at the house, Alex's house, and she calls Amira late at night at 11 or something to come to the house and pick up Briar, the child, to go out of the house because of this incident. And so Amira takes Briar to a shopping mall, a grocery store, because what else would you do at 11 o'clock? And there she is almost arrested by the guard because they think she's a young Black woman and she has this white child. She must have kidnapped this child. And then the story develops from there. Sounds like a good idea, and it could have been. But first of all, the writing was just awful. It was so clunky that it felt no editor even had a look at the writing. The characters were flat, like, paper thin, completely two-dimensional. There was no depth to the characters, and the story had if you can hang together a story by plot holes, then you have this book. Just to give you one example, this incident at the beginning that sort of gets the story going, it's never talked about again. We don't know why somebody, I don't know, threw a stone through the window or something, what happened, what the police investigation turned out. Nothing. It was just there so that the author could get a mirror to pick up the child at night and go to a grocery store. I don't know. And that's not the only example. It was just really, really bad. I'm sorry. Again, a lot of people admired this book and praised it and gushed about it. I have no idea why, to be honest, because it was just really, really bad. Anyway, minority opinion as usual. These were my tops and flops for the month of April, March, sort of. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you are all safe and healthy. Looking forward to your comments as always, and I'll see you all soon in the next one.